Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Mary Hasek Grenier's and Emily C. Morry's book, Rochester Through Time. Now, I was raised in Rochester. It's my hometown. This is Rochester, New York, not Rochester, England, or Rochester, Michigan, or anything else. Rochester, New York, the Flower City. This is a very cool local history book. While on the surface, for people who are not from Rochester, don't have an interest in Rochester necessarily, it may not seem like there's much of interest in this book, but actually, I think the historiographic approach is very, very cool here. So historiography, for those of you who are not familiar with this term, is basically the sort of meta study of history. So historiography looks at how we construct historical narratives. What are the ways in which we tell history and why? So what I find really cool about Grenier and Morry's book is that their technique primarily revolves around paired photographs. Early photographs of particularly important sites in Rochester, and then more recent photographs. So, you know what? I'm gonna just start with that point. Actually, I do want to come back and talk a little bit about the introduction, and then I'm gonna talk about several of the paired photographs that they include in this book, because I think they're important for Rochester, or for me personally, or just generally interesting. I'm going to start with this one, this page here, which I'm going to try and hold in such a way that minimizes glare. So basically, this is what you got. You won't be able to read this, except I'm going to actually just go ahead and turn my supporting light off to the side. So what you've got in this case, this is the Charlotte Genesee Lighthouse, one of my favorite lighthouses, possibly my favorite lighthouse in the world. So we got up here an early photograph of it. Doesn't say what year that photograph is from, but in the top we've got an early photograph of it, and then we've got a more recent photograph of it. And in the middle, we've got a description of the lighthouse itself. So, in this case, what it says is, the caption is, "Shine a light. The Charlotte Genesee Lighthouse is the oldest lighthouse still standing on Lake Ontario. The octagonal stone tower was built in 1822 on a bluff overlooking the west shore of the Genesee River. The tower is 40 feet tall with a lantern room at the top where the lighthouse keeper kept the lights burning, initially using 10 argand lamps with reflectors, and then later a lantern with a Fresnel lens. The keeper and his family resided in the accompanying brick house constructed in 1863. The lighthouse later fell into disrepair, but Charlotte High School students successfully campaigned for its restoration in 1965. So this is the kind of historiographic approach that Grenier and Morry take in this book. They identify culturally significant, historically significant, interesting points around Rochester, and then they give us an early image and a more recent image, and they give us a bit of the history and the significance of that particular landmark. So, one thing that you often get in this book is a sense of the tension between continuity and change, right? So the two pictures of the Charlotte Genesee Lighthouse, they look fairly similar. They're actually not that different. The lighthouse was reconstructed, and so it looks relatively the same as it had before. But then in other places, you get very dramatic change. Like there's a couple here. there's one specifically I didn't mark, but I'm now going to try and find very quickly. There's a number of things where it's like, okay, here's one. No, that's not a great example. There's a number of instances in which the thing that was there just no longer is. And it's been just replaced with a gas station or shopping or something like that. So basically you have just the loss of city icons. Okay. So here's one. Gruber's Saloon was opened on Mill Street in 1893. There was a number of different sort of owners of it over time, but I mean, that's an early part, but today what's there in the place where it was is basically just a parking lot. So you've got that that tension between tradition and innovation, and that's really central to the story of Rochester that Grenier and Morry are telling. They're very, very interested in how the place changes over time and why it changes in particular ways. And so that structure of 2 points in time, an early picture of whatever significant landmark it is, a more recent example, a more recent picture, that's a dynamic and interesting way of constructing historical narratives. Because often when we think about history, when we think about the structure of a history, the way that history is typically told, we think about continuity, right? We think about Rochester was founded in 1818, and this is the history of it. We start from 1818, we go up through whatever, these various events. My cat is screaming. Sorry if the mic is picking that up. But we go through these various sort of events, and we look chronologically, generally. That's how history is typically constructed. Here they have eschewed that idea of direct chronology to localize history into specific buildings or monuments or institutions or locations around Rochester, and they're just giving us 2 points of contrast. And so again, the fact that we have some places that have remained largely the same or been sort of updated or remodeled but basically remained the same, and the fact that we have some places that are dramatically different creates this really interesting dynamism, this really interesting tension. And we kind of get a sense of that from the introduction. And I want to read you a decent chunk of this introduction. We kind of get a sense of this dynamism between continuity and change, between things staying the same and things moving forward. Because Rochester is an industrial city and has been for a long time. And so those elements of progress, growth, development exist in tension with the attempts to preserve Rochester traditions, Rochester locations, etc., etc. Sorry. So the introduction here says, Rochester is a water-borne city. The Seneca of the Haudenosaunee, who first inhabited this area, provided the names of our waterways. Ontario is their word for beautiful waters, and Genesee their name for beautiful valley. The glaciers that advanced and receded over hundreds of millennia carved a unique landscape. Watercourses spurred the area's development. The upper and lower falls provided the necessary power for milling flour, grinding corn, and later for driving industries and producing electricity. The Erie Canal, dug out by hand, horse, and shovel by largely immigrant labor, rapidly expanded the city's fortunes by providing an inexpensive way to shop to ship products to market. The Genesee River still retains much of its natural beauty as it flows through the city with trails along the Maplewood area, downtown walkways, and many little parks featuring views of the High Falls. Because the river bisects the city, Rochester's many bridges, including the majestic Veterans Memorial Bridge and the modern art-like Freddie Sue span, are some of its most iconic landmarks. The city's other defining watermark, lake effect snow, has also influenced our fortunes by selecting for resilient residents. To be sure, Rochester has been shaped as much by its inhabitants as by its natural resources. We are a city of foreign immigrants and American migrants, and our industries by and large were not developed by children of privilege. The heart of our city is based on ordinary people who do extraordinary things with their lives and resources. While the fearless activism of the city's most cherished citizens, Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, helped establish Rochester as a site of social progressivism, the labors of our residents inspired Rochester's reputation at various times as the Flower City, F-L-O-U-R, the Flower City, F-L-O-W-E-R, and America's first boomtown and the World Image Center. So again, I like that idea of foregrounding continuities and changes as the driving force for understanding history. I think it's a really, really effective approach, and it makes for a really interesting way of presenting local history, especially because you have that sense of how there's the old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same, and the joke parody, the less things change, the more they stay the same. I think you've got kind of both of these ethics working here, both of these ideas, that as Rochester has developed as a city, as a community, as an industrial center, etc., things have shifted while maintaining continuities. And I think that's a really cool way of presenting things. So, in the rest of this video, I want to just show you a few of the pages here, some of the things that are important, either across the board in terms of Rochester history, or some things that have personal resonances for me. So I'm going to again turn this light off to the side so you can see some of these images better. So the first one I want to show you, this one, Rochester has the first public memorial, or the first public statue honoring an African American in U.S. history. The Frederick Douglass sculpture was created in 1899, or was unveiled in 1899, following Douglass's death in 1895. So, that's the first monument in the United States honoring an African American. Frederick Douglass, one of Rochester's favorite sons, definitely. Along similar lines, the Susan B. Anthony House. Anthony was obviously one of the most important women's rights crusaders of what's now called first wave feminism, the women's suffrage movement. Every year on her every election cycle, on her gravestone, people come and leave their I voted stickers, which I think is actually kind of causing problems for the tombstone, because the adhesive in the stickers is actually wearing down the stone. But this is Susan B. Anthony's house back in the day, and then today, still standing. It's now a museum, the Susan B. Anthony Museum. So again, there's this element of honoring Rochester's heritage. One of the other big elements, of course, with Rochester is industrial production. Can't sort of ignore that element. So there's a number of things in this book about Kodak. This is one that I wanted to particularly point out to you. This building here, giant brick building. Um, what's the official name of it? I guess they don't have an. I guess it's called Kodak Park, but I think Kodak Park actually expands beyond just this building. I'm not 100% sure about that. But this building, I really like this building because when my sister and I were kids and we would drive by this building, we always sort of played a game where we would try and guess how many bricks were in the building. Well, yeah, I mean, it's this really, really important element of Rochester's industrial history. Similarly, the Genesee Brewery. Jenny's a pretty good beer. It's a pretty basic American-style beer. It's definitely not a craft beer, but in the vein of things like Budweiser, Coors, these kinds of things. But one of the reasons the Genesee Brewery is interesting is because in addition to reflecting on Rochester's industrial heritage, it also reflects on Rochester's the prevalence of immigrants into Rochester in the 1800s, into the early 1900s, because the Genesee Brewery was founded by German immigrants in so it's been called the Genesee Brewery since 1878. The original brewery, the Aqueduct Spring Brewery, I think goes back slightly earlier than that, back maybe even as early as the 1840s, but this book doesn't say when the Aqueduct Spring Brewery was founded. But starting from the 1830s, 1840s, into the mid-1800s, a lot of German immigrants moved to Rochester and helped drive that industrial production that became so important for the city. The last one I'm going to show you. Because Rochester is not just an industrial city, it's not just a social progress city. Rochester is also an arts city. I mean, obviously the Eastman Kodak Company, film and multimedia and things like this are very, very important, but we've also got one of my favorite museums in the world, the Memorial Art Gallery. I love this museum. It's got art, it's got historic elements from ancient Egypt, from the ancient Near East, Greek and Roman stuff. It's got Asian artifacts, South Asian, East Asian. It's got Middle Eastern artifacts. It's a comprehensive, proper museum, and I actually really, really like it. I think it's this brilliant combination of having the range of stuff that you want in a museum. I'm done showing you pictures now. Having the range of stuff that you want in a museum, different types of exhibits, etc., combined with feeling very manageable. It's not massive in size in the way that something like the Victoria and Albert Museum is, or like the Smithsonian galleries, or things like that can be. Just sort of giant and overwhelming, and so much stuff you can't ever see all of it. The Memorial Art Gallery, in a way, I think is like Rochester itself. It's in this sort of sweet spot of size. It's small enough as an art gallery. Rochester is small enough as a city that it can feel very communal, it can feel very accessible, but it's still large enough that it can give you all of the stuff that you want to see in a museum, and Rochester can give you all the stuff that you want in a city.